Imagine you're living in a world that's entirely flat, like characters drawn on a piece of paper. This, by the way, is the world of Flatland, as conceptualized by Carl Sagan. Now consider the residents here. We'll call them the 2D prisoners. They live their lives without any awareness of a third dimension. They can move left, right, forward and backward, but the idea of up or down is beyond their comprehension. What if one day something from our three-dimensional world pokes through Flatland? Let's say it's a sphere, like a basketball. As it passes through their world, what the Flatlanders see is a circle that first appears as a point, grows to its widest, then shrinks back to a point before vanishing. To them, it's a mysterious event, almost like magic. In physics, hyperspace refers to a space of higher dimensions. We're familiar with the three spatial dimensions: length, width, and height. But what if there's more dimensions than we can perceive? Extra dimensions, if you will, existing just outside our perception, yet still very much a part of the cosmos. We're going to journey beyond these hypothetical realms, a reality of the unknown, the unseen, and the unexperienced. Our journey begins in the late 19th century. A brilliant mathematician, Hermann Minkowski, was one of the many scholars striving to understand the intricate fabric of the universe. The stage had been set by the revolutionary work of physicists like James Clerk Maxwell. His equations of electromagnetism hinted at an intricate dance between the spatial dimensions and an entity as pervasive and fundamental: time. The pivotal piece of the puzzle fell into place with the groundbreaking work of a former student of Minkowski's. It's none other than Albert Einstein. In 1905, Einstein published his special theory of relativity. Its radical proposition says that space and time were not independent, but instead interwoven into a singular space-time fabric. It was Einstein's bold thinking that inspired Minkowski. As a mathematician, he sought a geometric understanding of Einstein's theory, a way to visualize the new space-time reality. His profound insight was the concept of a four-dimensional space-time continuum, where now time serves as the fourth dimension, alongside the three spatial dimensions we're familiar with. But that's not the whole picture. The laws of physics as we understand them seem to need more room than just four dimensions. In one way, they fit together nicely, but not perfectly. It's not until we move into hyperspace and begin the search for these higher dimensions.
When you go to this larger pond, this pond of hyperspace, then all the laws of physics just fit together like a jigsaw puzzle.
String theory, a fundamental theory aiming to unify quantum mechanics and general relativity, postulated that our universe is composed of tiny vibrating strings existing in 10 dimensions. These strings, each vibrating at its own unique frequency, give rise to the diverse particles and forces we observe in our universe. However, in the 90s, scientists added a twist to the tale. Physicist Edward Witten revolutionized the field by introducing an 11th dimension. It proposed that other higher dimensional objects called brains could exist and vibrate in this hyperspace. Under this perspective, our universe itself could be a gigantic membrane, vibrating in this higher dimensional space. And so our understanding of the universe evolved once more. These extra dimensions might not be small or hidden. They could be vast and possibly infinite. Like flies that are trapped on a sticky paper, we human beings are stuck in our universe, unable to perceive or interact with these higher dimensions. But if we look at one specific force in the universe, it might explain to us something. You see, there are forces around us that we often take for granted, one of which is gravity. Despite being a fundamental force, gravity is surprisingly weak. Think about it. When you decide to get up and go to the bathroom, you effortlessly overcome the gravitational pull of the entire Earth. It could be that gravity seeps across these dimensional brains, which in turn makes a great explanation for why gravity force is so weak in our universe. Could this truly be the case?
We can actually perhaps detect experimentally the presence of alternate universes. We can detect dark matter-like objects from other universes hovering just above our universe. This is not just science fiction.
Our exploration into hyperspace naturally leads us to an even more mind-bending concept: the possibility of multiple dimensions of time. John William Dunne, an Irish engineer and philosopher, produced a distinct body of work that continues to have a profound impact in scientific and philosophical discourse. His conceptualization of time didn't stop at a singular linear dimension. You see, in the realm of general relativity, space and time meld together into a block space-time. Dunne suggested we need this additional dimension to simply measure our progression along our individual timelines. For example, if a person stays inside a supermassive black hole, how would you know that he is experiencing a different passage of time as opposed to ours?
Are there multiple temporal dimensions? My belief is that we may be looking at something that has access to either 4 or 6 additional dimensions. You know what they mean in physical reality.
Consequently, this proposal necessitates a novel tier of consciousness, which functions within this secondary time dimension. But the plot thickens, because the same reasoning applies to this new level. We need a third dimension of time, and a fourth, a fifth, and eventually spiraling into an infinite regress, an infinite hierarchy of time dimensions, each inhabited by corresponding levels of consciousness. And at the very end, Dunne envisioned something called a superlative general observer, existing in eternity.
Multiple temporal dimensions would be a decisive game changer in terms of changing everything that we know about the world.
If the prospect of multiple timelines feels overwhelming for you, let's recalibrate our perspective. With the power of advanced computation at my disposal, we'll now shift our gaze to a concept that's a tad more tangible, a little more grounded. The thought experiment known as the twin paradox. Imagine a pair of twins, perfectly identical in every way. Let's call them Ace and Bob. Ace, the adventurous one, takes off into space in a high-speed spaceship, while Bob remains on Earth. When the spacefaring twin returns, he is significantly younger than the Earthbound twin. This is the basic idea of the twin paradox, a consequence of Einstein's theory of relativity. But let's add another layer to this thought exercise. Suppose these twins share not only identical genetics, but also identical fates. This means that whatever genetic ailment befalls Bob will also affect Ace, given enough time. Now, since Bob has aged more, he experiences this ailment first. Once they reunite, he can tell his younger twin about it. For instance, when Bob was 53 years old, he developed colon cancer, leading him to foretell Ace that he would also face the same cancer at 53, and perhaps some other genetic diseases throughout his timeline so far. So Bob, having experienced more time, can offer insights to his younger brother about what lies ahead in their identical fate. In this scenario, we've established a system where the normal flow of time for Bob, who aged normally, is essentially a higher temporal dimension compared to the time experienced by Ace. This takes the idea of the twin paradox and adds an extra layer of complexity, quite literally an additional dimension. It makes us reconsider ingrained beliefs about time, about causality, and about the very nature of our existence. Now, to aid us in the next level of this thought exercise, we'll be using a more general terminology. Instead of Ace and Bob, we'll speak of dimensions that we label as level alpha and beta. But it just doesn't stop here. We'll also expand these to encompass even higher dimensions. A little bit of setup before we proceed to these hypothetical higher dimensions. Although we experience a tangible 3D existence around us, we see a 2D representation of our environment through our eyes, which our brains then interpret to create a sensation of depth. This ultimately gives us a perception of a 3D world built from the flat two-dimensional input we receive. A similar concept has been proposed by cognitive scientist Donald Hoffman.
Whatever reality is, you don't see it. You see a user interface. There's this whole new world beyond space-time that is making explicit symmetries that are true of the data that cannot be seen in space-time.
If we extend this thought experiment to hypothetical higher dimensional beings, say those existing in the fourth dimension, these entities would likely capture a 3D snapshot of their surroundings. It might look like a 3D hologram inside their brains, which would then be processed to construct a perception of the 4D world around them. But this is not just about raw perception. With a higher dimension comes an expanded perspective, which opens doors to a deeper comprehension of reality. A higher level being might have an all-encompassing view of our 3D world and perceive time as another navigable dimension. And just like in our twin analogy, Bob, who is in a higher level of understanding of Ace's timeline, is like having a bird's-eye view of the whole maze so far. They can quote-unquote see the future of lower-level beings and perhaps guide them towards specific outcomes. But it's not because they have mystical powers, it's more about being able to see the full view of the landscape of time, suggesting a full view of the events that lies ahead. So my question now, are you ready to ascend to these higher framework of thinking? Diving deeper into the concept of these multiple time, let's explore what reality might be like for a being in the beta dimension. This beta entity perceives time quite differently from how the alpha being does, simply because beta has experienced the previous time. Imagining beta existence is like watching a movie on DVD or Netflix. You see movies that you watch in cinema, they're being played at roughly 24 frames a second, scene by scene, in a linear time. You cannot fast forward or skip any part. However, it's not the case with the beta entity. They can fast forward or rewind to specific scenes of their life, ones that they find enjoyable. They can relive the moments, different events, moving in a non-linear progression through their timeline. End, beginning, and middle, or in any order for that matter. I hope this reminds you of something. The Interstellar's Tesseract scene. It's a perfect example of the beta dimension. Cooper, within the multidimensional construct of a tesseract, has the ability to access any point in time within a specific location, his daughter's bedroom. He's not merely watching these moments unfold linearly like an alpha entity, he's actively able to jump around within the timeline of the room's history. In fact, he can choose any specific event that he like, in which order and how many times. Coming back to our point, this beta dimension is a massive leap from the linear time perception of hypothetical alpha beings like us. We are moving through reality, at one Planck time at a time. Since we're talking about a deeper understanding of reality, what does it take to really see the bigger picture? Perhaps more than just the ability of beta to fast forward through time and relive different moments. For that, we need to step one dimension higher, to a dimension we would call gamma. Imagine a world where every moment of existence, every decision, every twist and turn of your life is laid bare before you. You're no longer inside the simulation, no longer merely interacting with it. Instead, you're an outsider looking in, and you hold the entire chronology in your grasp. This is the reality of gamma. In a sense, a gamma entity perceives all the sequences of beta's timeline simultaneously. This enhanced level of consciousness transcends the simple progression of moments, allowing for an all-encompassing observation of the entire film strip of time, even before that chronology is being played out. A profound question arises. What if you could access such a hypothetical dimension? Well, at this level, you don't just live through life moments. You would see each frame, each moment of time, as part of a larger cohesive picture, your progression as a human. The brilliance of gamma perception lies in your ability to dissect each frame, each data point, in an almost infinite number of ways. Want to gauge the intensity of emotions you experienced at a specific point in time? The graph has a variable for that. If you're interested in mapping your net worth progression throughout your life, there's a line that traces the ups and downs of your financial journey. Even the physical aspects of your existence can be quantified, like a variable for the number of wrinkles on your face at each point in your life. It seems that you follow a specific skincare routine during your teenage years, resulting in a significant reduction in the amount of wrinkles. Anyhow, it's about having the ability to view all the frames at once, essentially from a bird's eye view.
If you go to a higher dimension, it's not unrealistic to think that you step out of the time dimension, and now you look at time as though we look at space. And you can jump in at any point, relive it. We don't know yet if you can interfere with events that, quote, have already happened. If your whole timeline is just already there, what does it mean to jump into it and then change something?
That's right. This does not mean that gamma can change the past or the future easily. For example, gamma perception would allow us to modify our skincare routine, perhaps reducing the number of wrinkles even more. And this shift would still exist within the bounds of our original timeline. But what if we yearn to see not just the film that our life currently is, but the myriad possibilities of what it could be? For that, we need to transcend further, into the realm of delta. Taking another leap up in these higher dimensions, we now venture into the world of delta, the plane of possible worlds. In this realm, perception goes beyond simply experiencing different possibilities. It involves visually seeing them all, the mesmerizing network of paths. While gamma can identify and respond to hiccups as they arise, delta already has the full spectrum of possibilities laid out before their very eyes. Consider this graph again. These so-called branching, which were dotted lines in gamma's perception, they become clearly tangible to delta. They sprawl out in every direction. Each decision, each potential sequence of events unfolds like a living tree. Every branch representing a unique outcome, a distinct narrative of our existence. You might remember this scene from Avengers: Infinity War. We see Dr. Strange peers into the future to view all the potential outcomes of the battle with Thanos.
Forward in time, to view alternate futures, to see all the possible outcomes.
Let me make this clear for you. He wasn't merely predicting odds. He was actually seeing each potential outcome. All the 14 million different possible routes to a victory against Thanos. In our context, Dr. Strange was embodying the delta level. Another fitting analogy for Delta's perspective might be that of a seasoned entrepreneur establishing a new business. These guys don't operate on guesswork or engage in trial and error, because they can implement a specific strategy for their circumstances and they know the exact steps to reach the desired target, their business target. That is the realm of Delta, a realm of absolute awareness. Here, the labyrinth of timelines and outcomes are visible, where the course of events across multiple timelines is not a mystery to be unfolded. We've been operating under a specific assumption all this time, that every path we've pondered upon originates from a common start, the origin point. This obviously represents a very special case. What if the initial conditions were slightly different? What if the genesis point of these numerous timelines was shifted ever so slightly? Does the labyrinth remain the same, as if it's being offset by a few pixels? In order to address this, we must venture into the world of Epsilon. According to chaos theory, even a small change in the initial conditions can lead to drastically different outcomes. The butterfly effect in all its unpredictable glory. The key here is initial conditions, the starting state from which everything else unfolds. In a simple system like a pendulum swinging back and forth, knowing the initial conditions can allow us to predict exactly what the system will do in the future. But that's not the case for complex systems. For instance, the double pendulum system, which adds a second pendulum at the end of the first. The interactions between these elements introduce a sensitivity to initial conditions. A tiny tweak will eventually lead to dramatically different outcomes. Think about the following cases. In the context of wrinkles on an individual's face, what if a child is born to different parents? Because in essence, this is a slight shift in the initial condition. A new combination of genetic material, and the child would have an entirely different genetic blueprint. As the child grows older, the pattern of wrinkles might be entirely different from what it would have been in the original timeline. Or what if we're looking at the business context, and we might wonder, what if a business had started 3 years earlier, perhaps before the pandemic hit? Or what if the starting capital had been different? These changes in initial conditions could dramatically alter the trajectory of the business. Perhaps you might be more familiar with this one, the fine-tuning of the universe. Take, for example, gravitational constant, the value that governs the force of gravity. If it were slightly stronger, matter would collapse together. If it were marginally weaker, stars might never form at all. Our universe would be a vast, cold, and lifeless expanse. Such is the potential power of chaos theory in this level. Hypothetical beings who could access the world of Epsilon possess an expansive control over their existence, thanks to their ability to perceive different initial conditions. These entities are capable of seeing their reality, all based on a different starting point. Instead of being tethered to a singular timeline, Epsilon beings can probe into the other initial points of existence. To those who can access this level, it represents an extraordinary freedom to explore, experiment, and experience a grand array of alternate realities. Just when you thought that our journey couldn't venture any further, we could, hypothetically, ascend into an even more profound level of existence. You see, what would happen if we could map out the vast plane of possible initial conditions, I mean every conceivable one of them? All these different starting points of existence. And what if this tremendous matrix of alternate realities could be understood as a single comprehensible stack? Welcome, as we venture into the world of Lambda. Advancing from the Epsilon level, we reach the realm of Lambda, or the plane of different initial conditions. Imagine each variation of initial conditions as a sheet of paper, each representing a different reality that is underpinned by its unique starting point. The best part is that an entity capable of accessing this level would be able to see not just one or two, but the entire stack of papers all at once. A grand library of every possible beginnings and the paths to which they ultimately lead. Entities with the capacity to access the lambda level bear a resemblance to skilled puppeteers, orchestrating a cosmic theater of infinite possibilities. You might be asking, what's the significance? What are the manifestations of being able to wield this extraordinary breadth of power? While coming back to our business example, with Lambda's power, it's like having the unique insight to discern which business idea, with precisely how much initial capital, that will yield the optimal results. Or perhaps we delve into a more personal aspect. Imagine the possibility of being born to different parents, maybe in a different country or a different era. Since you have the complete knowledge of these databases of possible beginnings, you have the remarkable ability to pick one specific life path, that one plane that would result in the most peaceful life of yours. It's important to note that the chaos of different potentialities is still there, but lambda entities can navigate through this chaos with purpose, with intentionality and precision. They'd know exactly how much capital investment to run that business, and they'd know precisely the parents from whom you should be born. They're not just seeing all possible futures from different beginnings, they're choosing the optimal one. A good illustration of the lambda world is in the movie Mr. Nobody. Nemo is the last mortal human in a future Earth. He has the ability to recall his past in several possible and divergent timelines, each based on key initial decisions that lead to vastly different outcomes.
Every path is the right path.
Just like Nemo, a lambda entity would be able to navigate through its possible existences, choosing the optimal set of initial conditions to live by. After all, higher dimensions confer an ability to make well-informed decisions about preferred paths. It's a transition from seeing the visual clues to utilizing these visual clues in pursuit of a certain goal. This level is about honing in on the ideal path from a sea of probabilities of different beginnings. But is there more that we've missed? Are we done with our exploration of hyperspace? What if our neat stacks of paper aren't the whole picture? Welcome to the world of Sigma. We did leave out one crucial detail. You see, in all our previous discussions from alpha to lambda, we've always operated under one key assumption. Our laws of physics are eternally consistent. The metaphorical stack of paper was bound by the same set of rules, the same gravity, the same speed of light, the same cause and effect. Isn't that rather anthropocentric to view the cosmos in this way? So what if we did question the consistency of our laws of physics? What if in some far-flung corners of the hyperspace, different rules apply? Perhaps where the effects precede causes, or where time might not be linear, or it could be where gravity might be a repelling force instead of an attracting one. And this is the gist of the sigma level. The laws of physics are just another variable in the grand cosmic equation. We're not only changing how we view the branching of timelines or the initial conditions, we're changing the rule book itself, the different physical laws. Consider again the aging process we talked about. In our reality, aging is associated with physical changes. We're born young, grow older, and eventually pass away. But what if an alternate set of physical laws were to invert this process, such that you might be born old and pass away young? Or let's imagine a universe where time doesn't follow the rules we know. The movie Tenet delves into this concept. Some characters actually experience time in reverse. And in terms of broader cosmic phenomena, consider the laws that govern the behavior of the universe itself. For example, if gravity were too strong, galaxies, stars, and life as we know it couldn't exist. But perhaps in a different box, such a universe could thrive just fine under this extreme gravity.
It could be that other Big Bang events might have a different laws of physics in it. If you cross over from one universe to the other, and the charge on the electron is slightly different, all your atoms could just compress.
Again, this brings us back to the concept of fine-tuning. Our universe appears to be fine-tuned for life, which means that small variations in the physical constants would make life as we know it impossible. But in the sigma level, different values for these constants perhaps could give rise to viable universes, realms with completely different physical laws, and perhaps distinct life forms. This really prompts us to question not just how things are, but how they could be under an entirely different set of physical laws. Finally, the omega, the grand finale in our exploration of multidimensional realities. Entities in this level are privy to the existence of an infinite number of boxes, each with its own set of physical laws. Everything that can be imagined exists somewhere within this infinite array. The concept of impossible ceases to exist. You might find a reality where planets don't revolve around stars, or where colors are perceived as sounds, or even where the abstract concept of time doesn't exist. Every conceivable reality, every abstract concept that could ever be dreamt up, has its own place in this infinite expanse. Even realities beyond our wildest imaginations.
One of the consequences of this idea is over time, you produce patches of ever increasing variety, so that every conceivable possibility that can occur will occur in some patch.
A hypothetical entity capable of accessing the omega dimension is not just playing the game. They are creating new games, new realities, and entirely new frameworks for existence. The concept of determinism might take on a new meaning in the omega dimension. With knowledge of all possible boxes, an omega entity might be able to determine the course of events, not just in one universe, but in all of them. This is a level of understanding that goes beyond anything we, as alpha three-dimensional beings living in a four-dimensional world, can fully comprehend. As we wrap up this exploration of multidimensional existence, we're left pondering an existential question. Why do these boxes, these universes with their unique physical laws, exist in the first place? Who placed them there? And yet, what would it be like to bring some structure into all this infinite possibilities? I mean, rather than continually transcending our view, what if we took the opposite approach? What happens when we impose specific constraints on each level, forcing them to operate within their own boundaries? So, in the second part of this video, we'll fully shift this perspective for a provocative thought. A portion of this segment draws inspiration from a thought-provoking book by Michio Kaku, Hyperspace, a scientific odyssey through parallel universes, time warps, and the 10th dimension. Professor Kaku takes us on a journey beyond the familiar three dimensions of space and one of time. So now, to really appreciate where these ideas come from, let's rewind to 19th century Germany. A brilliant scientist at the time, Carl Friedrich Gauss, was way ahead of his time. He imagined a world that wasn't flat, but could actually curve, something he called theorema egregium. By simply examining differential geometry, he figured out how to measure the curvature of surfaces without needing to step back and look at the space around them. Another German mathematician, Bernhard Riemann, introduced a revolutionary concept. He developed the mathematics necessary to describe spaces of various dimensions, which he called an n-dimensional manifold with a metric. This generalization transformed how mathematicians view the nature of space and laid the groundwork for Einstein's relativity in physics. The interesting thing is that Riemann did not do this for Einstein, and his work was completely decades prior. In fact, it was considered abstract mathematics until the need arose to describe the non-Euclidean geometry of space-time in the presence of gravity. But some would argue that even without Riemann geometry, Einstein was brilliant enough to develop the necessary equations independently, and in the end came up with a similar equation just like this, that we all familiar with. Around the same time, Hermann von Helmholtz, who was also a fellow German scientist just like Einstein, made a fascinating discovery. He explored the connection between mathematics of hyperspace and human perception. He suggested that just as beings in a two-dimensional world would struggle to comprehend three-dimensional objects, humans might not be equipped to perceive higher dimensions. So what does it mean that lower-dimensional beings can't comprehend 3D existence? We'll demonstrate this in the next chapter of this video. Picture a scenario where you can instantly travel from one place to another without any effort. No more long commutes or rushing to class. This thought brings up a fascinating question. What kind of beings have the ability to appear and disappear at will? According to Professor Michio Kaku, the answer lies in higher dimensional worlds. So to illustrate this, let's revisit our dear friends. In their 2D world, you can trap someone simply by drawing a circle around them. They can't escape outside the circle because their world doesn't include the idea of stepping over it. But for us living in 3 dimensions, it's a simple matter to help them. We can just reach down, lift the Flatlander, and place him outside the circle. What seems easy for us would appear as a remarkable power to them. And think about the perspective of a Flatland guard. Seeing a prisoner vanish and reappear elsewhere would be utterly confusing. For the guard, the prison is secure and escape-proof. The idea of moving up of the flatland plane doesn't make sense in their two-dimensional world. Similarly, the notion of seeing or interacting with their internal organs would seem impossible. But for beings in higher dimensions, it's trivial to reach inside a flatlander and perform surgery without cutting the skin.
Medical surgery in a two-dimensional universe, they'd have to cut you open and then reach in and do what they need to, come out and then stitch you up again. If we live in 3 dimensions, you get to look down on that flat world and see all the inner guts of every living creature in that universe. Because there is no boundary above and below, it's only within the plane itself. You can see the heart beating, you can see the spleen, the liver, the pancreas, the lungs, you can see it all.
From the Flatlander's viewpoint, beings from our three-dimensional world would seem to have godlike powers. The ability to see into and interact with closed spaces, such as houses or underground areas, would be viewed as omnipotent. But for us, these abilities are not magic. They are simply the result of a more advantageous perspective that comes from existing in a higher dimension.
Of course, we go higher, there's 5th dimension, 6th dimensions, this sort of thing. Mathematically, you can calculate what all the properties are.
That's right. If we go back to our earlier bit about the 2D prisoner, we can also extend this concept to our three-dimensional reality. You see, as a 3D creature, we fully experience all 3 spatial dimensions. But again, consider the idea of a 4-dimensional space-time continuum. In terms of imprisonment, we are in a sense prisoners of the present. As Dr. Tyson eloquently put it, we are forever transitioning from the past to the future. So what if we are prisoners in this alpha world and want to break free? Well, we can achieve this by transcending into beta, where we are no longer bound by the present. In the intricate physics of our universe, our understanding of space and time has evolved from seeing them as separate entities to recognizing their deep interconnection. This 4-dimensional space-time curvature is influenced by the mass and energy of objects, creating what we perceive as gravity. In this framework, time is the 4th dimension, extending beyond the 3 spatial dimensions we navigate daily. It also suggests that the passage of time is influenced by the gravitational pull of masses. This, in particular, leads to the realization that time can stretch or compress. Such understanding allows us to see time not as a universal constant, but as a dimension that, like space, is shaped by the dynamic structure of our universe. So back to our point. What alpha beings would experience linearly as a sequence of events from the past to the future, they are essentially prisoners of time's flow.
How do we put us in a cell? We have 6 walls, a ceiling, floor, 4 walls around us. We think we are completely contained within it. A higher dimensional creature says, just step out and then step back in and you're outside the cell. We said, I don't know what you're talking about.
Hold on. We're talking about adding another dimension to our world, which is the time component of a 4D space-time curvature. So we should think of this imprisonment as it's not only the spatial 6 walls that hold you, it's the linear progression of time that is always moving forward.
If we had access to the 4th dimension, which for us is what? Time, but wait, we're prisoners of time. So suppose we weren't prisoners of time. Suppose you could move through time the way we move through space. Could you then escape the prison?
So if you master the nonlinear progression of time, then you can step out of the linear flow. This allows you to exit your current moment and re-enter at a different point in time. So your prison escape begins the moment you take that first step through the so-called time door. You're no longer bound by the sequential order of events, and the spatial confines of the jail lose their power over you.
You just go back to a time before you got put in a prison, or go to the future where you were let go from the prison. Each of those counts as escaping the prison without ever breaking down the wall. So time can serve that same role if you had access to the past and to the future.
You might be wondering, this beta higher dimensional being sounds like too good to be true, right? It can always access both the past and the future, meaning that there's no need for a physical prison. Although there is actually a type of prison that will constrain the movement of beta. It's called the time prison. So in this hypothetical concept, prisoners are sentenced to a loop of repeated events for eternity. They would experience the same events, over and over again. It's not physical torture that confines them, but the idea of existing there forever. They can't leap forward in time because the future is just like the present. And so if you don't want to be constrained in this situation, what can you do? Is there a state of freedom you can attain to break free? Well, you can. You just need to reach the gamma level. So let's recap here for a second. In the previous part of this video, we discussed the difference between beta and gamma. The real difference is the idea that with beta, you don't know exactly where to time travel to. You try to probe and see different moments in space-time, but you don't have the bigger picture of your own timeline. It's like navigating a vast ocean with a compass that only tells you your current location. You can pedal forwards or backwards, visit any island and stuff, but there's no map showing all the routes, the storms, or the treasures. Each journey in the beta realm is an exploration. You have to make the guess based on your position without truly understanding the full expanse of the ocean and its myriad possibilities. Just like how Loki felt confused about his time slipping. And so to avoid being constrained in this situation, we need to transcend to the gamma realm. What's going to change is that now you're given a bird's eye view of the entire ocean of possibilities. Every possible route you could take from any point you're standing on. So it's not just about moving to different points along your timeline, it's about understanding the entire network of paths your journey could take. Suddenly you see how different choices branch out, creating different alternate realities, each with its unique outcomes and adventures. This realm allows you to not only visit any moment of the journey, but also to understand how each one of them connects, how one decision could diverge into multiple futures. Essentially to perceive the grand tapestry of your possible existences, woven by time.
And we'd be looking for things that would be new variables, new ways of working with the world that allowed us to do things that were previously considered inconceivable.
If you feel that there's nothing that can bind the gamma beings, that's not entirely true. As illuminating as it is, the panoramic view of your timeline in gamma comes with its own limitations. Yes, you can see the plausible different paths. But what about traversing them? By that I mean all of these possible worlds can actually exist as a way of interpreting the mathematics of quantum mechanics, where each one is a state in the global superposition of states. Yet all these realities remain intangible until they are observed. And the very act of observation collapses the superposition, making one of these many possibilities our perceived reality. So, what if this sort of ocean is kind of a prison itself, and that you need to find the one key to unlock yourself from within? Is there a way that you can navigate without exploring all these possible routes and get to the right path immediately? Well, in order to break free from this constraint, we need to explore what the next level offers. Stepping up one more level, we enter the realm of delta, or, as we explained in part 1, it's the superset of possible worlds. In delta, not only can you perceive the various potential outcomes of your ocean of choices, but you can also see all those choices concurrently. And so, the constraints of gamma are overcome by providing a comprehensive view of all possible paths simultaneously. More importantly, you aren't just aware of these different pathways. You can traverse and select from them without needing to observe and collapse the superposition as in gamma. This means you can navigate directly to the optimal reality, bypassing the trial and error of exploring such potential route. And so, you unlock the ability to choose the best possible outcome from potential realities, such that you can escape the constraints that bind you in lower dimensions. So let's denote this superset with this symbol, inspired by Schrödinger's many worlds interpretation. But did you notice that we mentioned potential realities, and not all potential realities? You might be asking, what else is there? Seems like there's nothing that can constrain them, right? Well, you guessed it. All of these hierarchies are bound by the same initial condition. Think about wanting to know how you came to be born. You might look into earlier events, facts about your parents and how they met, facts about your grandparents, or even facts about humans in general. Soon enough, you'd find yourself thinking about how our place in the universe evolved. You can trace the chain of causes and effects back and back and back, arbitrarily far. But in the grandest scheme of things, this branched timeline of delta beings converges at the same origin point, the Big Bang. So, how do we break free from this constraint? What if we wanted to create another pathway with different initial conditions? The answer lies in our previously mentioned epsilon level. This is how we can break free. There could be completely different realities created through initial conditions distinct from our own Big Bang. Different initial conditions will create different universes, and the resulting branching of timelines from that universe's beginnings to all its possible endings will form another subset separate from those associated with our own universe. In Epsilon, you are not just navigating a single tree of possible outcomes, you gain the ability to explore multiple universes, each originating from different starting points. This level offers a multiplicity of beginnings, allowing for a broader understanding of existence beyond the singular initial conditions that constrain the previous lower-level inhabitants. But again, the question becomes, how can we constrain this omniscient power? Is there any way to bind an epsilon being? This time, I really want you to think this through. Back in the gamma level, we know that gamma doesn't have the complete subset of possible worlds. So when we ask gamma beings to locate the specific trajectory to get to that treasure island, it's not so easy for them. They'd have to acquire the superset of their possible worlds. And so if we ask the same type of question, can you constrain these epsilon beings? Well, just ask them what the specific pathway from the many different initial conditions is. That will yield the optimal goal. There you go. An epsilon being could not answer it, unless they have already mapped the whole planes of different initial conditions. And this brings us to the lambda level. Just like our prior explanation, lambda level beings have mapped the entirety of possible different initial conditions. So if you ask them for one specific life path that will maximize your happiness in a given reality, they would already know the answer to this fundamental question, even without having to perceive each timeline one by one. Entities of the lambda world possess a comprehensive map of existence, encompassing every possible initial condition and its resulting hierarchies. This understanding allows them to pinpoint the exact path that leads to any desired outcome. I mean any outcome that they wished for, no matter what they are. A hypothetical inhabitant of the lambda world really transcends the state where every choice can be made with perfect clarity. Now we have another addition to our symbol, capital lambda and an origin point, which should look something like this. So the question now is, how can you constrain this being? I mean, if they encompass everything we know about all these different subsets of starting points, what else is there? Well, let me refresh your memory. We can restrict them using a completely different parameter, differing laws of physics. You see, when this lambda being is constrained to something like reversed entropy, he ages in reverse, being born old and passing away young. He's not able to traverse the same subset of different initial conditions because he must consider an entirely different subset, and that only exists in another subset of this different box. It's important to note that for lower-level beings, navigating this branching of timelines is not easy. In fact, it's almost impossible under different sets of physical laws. Perhaps even a slight attempt to deviate can significantly alter their existence completely.
What's happening?
We're outside time.
So in the sigma level, the very rules of existence can differ drastically. These beings are not just navigating multiple timelines or initial conditions within a single universe, they are exploring entirely new sets of physical laws. These realities can have different gravitational constants, different interactions of matter and energy, and even different conceptions of time. This level showcases the ability to move through these diverse realities, each with its own distinct laws of physics, and fundamentally transcending the limitations of all previous levels. But this time, let's constrain the residents of this level. Using the same line of thinking, we could ask a hypothetical sigma entity which subset of different physical laws will yield a specific end goal. Essentially, a universe where the laws of physics behave in a certain way, and must have started from a particular initial condition. In the end, we'll see that sigma beings wouldn't be able to answer that question without analyzing each one of those boxes and figuring it out along the way. The only way they could be free from this constraint is to possess the characteristics of the grand finale of all existence, the omega dimension. This level is not bound by any constraints that limit lower dimensional beings in our discussion so far. An omega entity have the ability to perceive the power set of all possible existences, from every possible beginning to every possible end, under every conceivable set of physical laws. At this ultimate level, there are no limitations. An omega entity can understand the intricate details of every reality within infinite realities. He can instantaneously determine the exact set of conditions and physical laws needed to achieve any specific goal across any reality, transcending all levels of existence and achieving a state of ultimate freedom that encompasses the entirety of all possible realities. And so, this is the final symbol to add to our higher dimensional state vector. Reflecting back, we now have three critical elements to navigate this hyperspace world: the many-world state, the initial condition state, and the physical laws. With these state vectors, we can pinpoint exactly where any higher dimensional being resides in hyperspace, as if we describe an object's specific coordinates in the 3D Cartesian system.
I claim that there are going to be 10 extra coordinates. That's something called a symmetric 2 tensor, or a metric. We can do incredible things that are not possible because we don't know the framework.
Some of the mysterious things we are describing accurately make sense in a higher dimension. And that's an aspect of what these higher dimensional physicists are trying to establish.
Just as our limited alpha brains struggle to perceive higher dimensions, it turns out we find it equally challenging when it comes to comprehending lower dimensional existences. I mean, consider the Flatlander story we discussed at the beginning of this video. It's the reality of a flat 2D creature, along with one temporal dimension of time. But imagine what happens if we have only two spatial axes without time. What would happen to our Flatlanders? In fact, what happens to entities in 1D and thus 0D? The answer is that the absence of time would freeze everything in place. There would be no progression, no movement, and no change. Everything would be static. In fact, there would be no elapsed time between when a photon is emitted from a source and when it is absorbed by an object in Flatland. And this holds true not just for creatures in the Flatland world, but also for us in our three-dimensional reality. Throughout our discussion so far, we've always treated time as this fundamental dimension. That all these realities from alpha to omega essentially revolve around the idea that if you have multiple temporal dimensions and with time extending infinitely, you can examine the distinct physical characteristics of a specific reality of interest. Yet this time, what if we wanted to treat higher dimensional objects in terms of spatial dimensions, instead of temporal ones? For instance, what a Flatlander perceives when looking at a 3D cube is only the cross-sections within their 2D plane. When the cube rotates rapidly, these shapes seem like random patterns. This idea is a lot like what happens during a solar eclipse. Consider that during an eclipse, even though we exist in a 3D space, our perspective is reduced to a 2D cross-section of the moon's shadow. And this shadow can look different depending on where you are on the planet. Here's what you'd see in California. This one is from Colorado, and this last one from New York. And just like that 2D representation of the moon, if we have a flat square that's 2D and pull it upwards, it becomes a 3D cube. Stretch it into an unseen fourth spatial dimension, and we'll get a 4D tesseract, just like this. Another hypothetical object that could exist in this fourth spatial dimension is something called a Klein bottle. It is an example of a non-orientable surface. The interesting thing is that if traveled upon from one side of the surface, we could get back to the point of origin while flipping the traveler upside down. This abstract concept might be perplexing for humans, but higher dimensional beings find it apparent and simple. Perhaps just like when we 3D beings can grasp the concept of a Mobius strip, which eventually loops back to its starting point. Yet any 2D creature would find it magical that we can go back to where we started in space. And so, in this analogy of the Klein bottle and Mobius strip, what if, in a higher dimensional framework of thinking, the linear time we experience is nothing but a causal loop that can be easily explored in higher dimensions, much like the perception of time at the beta or gamma level? So in that concept, we'll find that time doesn't just move forward in a straight line. It circles back, connecting the past and future in ways that aren't always so simple. If you find it hard to comprehend these abstract concepts, you're not alone. Even current AI systems struggles with our 3D reality. A researcher at Malmö University in Sweden is investigating this challenge. His research revolves around the question, could an AI robot perceive a fourth dimension? Magnus Johnson, the researcher in this context, noted that there's a limit even for normally developed human brains. In an interview, he stated, "We don't have the right representations to imagine 4 dimensions. Everything we think of is limited by these feature building blocks, but such building blocks can theoretically be built in AI and used within AGI. But what if we could design our own quantum technology capable of simulating the full spectrum of existence? A journey that begins in the familiar 3-dimensional world of alpha, reaching all the way to the boundless realm of omega. We're going to show you how it's possible to access these distinct levels of consciousness using tangible technology that's achievable in our time. So bear with us in the final part of this video as we dissect the specifics of how we reinterpret our existence. Before we dive into the steps to transcendence, let's establish some groundwork. The path from our starting point of existence to the ultimate state of knowledge isn't a journey everyone takes. It involves not just seeing new things, but also interpreting the world in a way that is fundamentally different from what was previously known. And many find comfort in familiar realities. The allure of the familiar, even when it's an illusion, often holds people back. As we ascend through these different levels, an intriguing pattern becomes evident. At each higher level, only a handful of entities are present. This is simply because by nature, it requires profound levels of perception and knowledge. And so it's not about fewer numbers reaching these heights, it's about the increasing complexity of understanding that is required at each stage.
The goal of physics, we believe, is to find an equation which will allow us to unify all the forces of nature and allow us to read the mind of God. And so the final resolution could be that God is a mathematician.
If we transgress the boundaries of this concept, we may eventually find ourselves in a hypothetical tier of consciousness inhabited by only a select few. And ultimately, at the apex of this hierarchy, we'd find a singular entity. This solitary state reflects a consciousness so advanced that it stands unparalleled. A realm beyond our comprehension, devoid of ordinary thoughts, ideas, or other beings. This ultimate level might even surpass our previously mentioned omega level. Because in the concluding segment of part 1, we confronted an existential question. Who put all these boxes? This leads us to consider the possibility of even higher levels overseeing all possible worlds. So as we ventured through the realms of consciousness, we now face an intriguing question. How do we start our own journey of transcendence with the technology we have today? So in the next chapter of this video, we'll focus on tangible steps to transcend our current understanding using modern quantum technology. It's about transforming these abstract concepts to explore the possibilities of higher levels of consciousness. Transitioning from alpha's linear time perception to beta's nonlinear time perception involves a substantial shift in understanding. Just like someone from our community asked, wouldn't you need to live through the alpha linear timeline to have the experience needed to rewind and fast forward in time? That's exactly the kind of thought experiment we're going to explore today. And so, let's consider a specific workflow to illustrate this leap. We have our 35-year-old subject named Dr. Allen. She's a dedicated neuroscientist and has been involved in cognitive research for years. Her primary motivation for this experiment is to map specific memories with high fidelity from the last 3 years. To achieve this, we will utilize a brain-computer interface system, or BCI. The subject undergoes a prep session. An initial electroencephalogram, or EEG, and fMRI scan are conducted to map the normal brain activity patterns. This focuses on the prefrontal cortex and hippocampus, parts of the brain that play key roles in memory and decision-making. This device comprises a non-invasive headset with magnetic coils and electrodes. It's used to deliver targeted TMS, or transcranial magnetic stimulation. It begins at a low intensity of around 1 to 2 millitesla and gradually increases to a maximum of 5 millitesla. Then, a frequency range between 1 to 20 Hz stimulates memory recall. The subject concentrates on a specific period from her past research events that she wants to revisit. The EEG monitors her brain activity in real time, and fMRI data shows which regions of the brain are most active in this processing. This stage generates a comprehensive dataset outlining how the subject's brain recalls different types of memories. The validated dataset is used to train a machine learning model, specifically a neural network. This model is trained to recognize specific neural activation patterns and associate them with different memory types. For example, it recognizes key checkpoints within the 3-year timeline, such as experimental procedures, theoretical work, or collaborations with peers. By the end of this, we have a predictive model that is capable of identifying the recalled memory based on EEG and fMRI data. In structured memory recall sessions, the subject focuses on remembering specific days from the past 3 years of her research. Each recalled memory, along with its corresponding neural activity, is logged to create a robust and searchable database within the BCI device. We now have a detailed and personalized digital archive of the subject's past experiences. Whenever she wishes to revisit a particular moment, the system analyzes her current neural patterns, identifies the corresponding memory in the database, and finally retrieves it for review via a VR headset. This allows her to rewind to specific memories from her timeline, just like the nonlinear time perception of the beta level. But if you think this sounds too far-fetched, well, there's already a similar technology that is currently being deployed. This is the current capability of contemporary AI systems, which can interpret human thoughts by analyzing data from fMRI.
Here, they took human beings, they stuck them into an fMRI machine, and they showed them images. And they taught the AI, I want you to translate from the readings of the fMRI, so how blood is moving around in your brain, to the image. Can we reconstruct the image then? The AI then only looks at the brain, does not get to see the original image, and it's asked to reconstruct what it sees.
If you believe that reaching the beta level of perception is still feasible, then let's consider going even further. How can we ascend to the gamma level, where our test subject would be able to comprehend an entire database in one comprehensive view? If you remember from our previous explanation, this realm is about the ability to visualize every conceivable moment and every memory expansively. And so, the challenge becomes to envision an entire timeline as one unified database. So how could we make this possible? Transitioning to this level of perception isn't just about enhancing memory recall. It involves overcoming our physical limitations as humans. We need to think about enhancing brain neuron efficiency and increasing brain volume. Let's simplify to understand this better. Imagine each day's memories as a single data point or series of images. So that's roughly 1,095 data points for 3 years. Suppose viewing a one data point activates about 0.1% of the brain's neurons. With an estimated 90 billion neurons in the brain, that's around 90 million neurons for one memory sequence. But remember, this is a simplification. Keep in mind that neuronal activation for a memory isn't just about the number of neurons, but also their connections and the patterns they form. With that, if one day's memory requires activating 0.1% of the brain's neurons, theoretically, it could only process 1,000 days of memories at once. And in our case, this is not enough for a complete 3-year span. Now, this is why we need to upgrade our subject. If we enhance the synaptic transmission by, let's say, 15% more efficient, each neuron could fire and recover more rapidly. This would expand the total capacity from 1,000 days to about 1,150 days, according to our simplified model. And so in this scenario, we have set up an experiment where our subject experiences a full 3-year timeline all at once, but with the caveat of making improvements to her brain performance for complete gamma-level perception. In fact, this pattern should be consistent throughout our discussion today, that the higher the level of consciousness our subject ascends into, the more stringent the requirements for experiencing that simulated reality. And this ties back to our earlier discussion about the hypothetical tiers of consciousness and their occupation of higher reality realms.
And the mathematics itself suggests a movement in which any particular element of space may have a field which unfolds into the whole. I think there's an intelligence that's implicit there. So the consciousness is really our most immediate experience of this implicate order.
Let's recap where we are. In the gamma realm, we've glimpsed our timeline and past choices. Already, we've placed certain constraints on the physical characteristics, so not everyone can access this level. But for those who can, what if you aspire to reach even higher, not just observing, but also shaping this complex web of possibilities? So for this, we need to introduce a new system, something called the Quantum Decision Mapping Interface, or QDMI. As we leap into this new level, the complexity of our model increases exponentially. Each decision, each crossroad we encounter opens up a vast network of possible outcomes. Let's consider the following experiment. Our subject, Dr. Allen, wants to explore how different choices lead to various outcomes. Her main motive remains that she becomes the most successful researcher in her world. So it's safe to say that we're simulating this way beyond the 3-year timeframe. In this model, there will be realistic challenges that our subject might face, from securing funding to achieving breakthroughs with her team. And this is why we need the QDMI to help us create a visual representation of the decision trees. It works like this. As our subject progresses, the QDMI updates in real time, integrating new information and outcomes. So each node branches out into various paths representing different choices and will dynamically alter the decision tree structure. Additionally, the QDMI is also equipped with a feature called scenario reiteration, which allows our subject to hypothetically rewind to previous decision nodes and explores alternative paths. For instance, by mapping out different ways a grant proposal could play out, we create a complete hierarchy for that variable. If we can repeat this for other variables like academic networking and lab management, we will see how each choice impacts her career progression. If we could meticulously map out every conceivable probability and its corresponding outcome, we would essentially unlock the full spectrum of delta. By running the simulation for one final time and considering all the cumulative insights and precise decision tree, our subject would navigate towards her predefined objectives with high levels of precision. And this represents the very essence of the delta level. The exploration of our test subject doesn't stop at this delta level, because the true depth of our simulation lies in challenging the very foundation of our journey. So, what if we want to aim outside of our predetermined starting point? Welcome to Epsilon. We're about to alter an initial condition that has so far dictated the course of our subject. So, what is that focal point that could demonstrate the impact of a different starting point in this case? Well, how about changing the lab assistant at the start of the simulation? A completely new person can play a crucial role in shaping the research direction, dynamics of lab management, and the overall approach to academic challenges. We can see how different skill sets and personalities can lead to vastly different decision trees and outcomes. Let's visualize how this works in practice. The presence of the new lab assistant modifies the initial nodes of the decision tree. The QDMI device is then recalibrated to reflect these changes. We can see a new set of decision paths appearing from the outset. There will be scenarios that specifically highlight the deviation from this new tree. Like their expertise might open up different methodologies, or there could be conflicting ideas when you work together. Then we'll use the scenario reiteration feature to allow revisiting decision points with this new character. That way, we can explore alternate paths within this new initial condition. We can encourage the test subject to experiment with different approaches to see how this assistant alters outcomes. After we map out all the possible decision trees and their consequences, we will have a hierarchy similar to the ones we mapped in Delta. It's just that now it's a parallel version where we start the model from a different starting point. Now let's take this further. What if we can map out all the different initial conditions, or in this case, the different choices of lab assistants, where we would run all the parallel hierarchies and have a complete overview of all possible planes of different starting points. And that's the next level of this quantum simulation, aka the lambda level. Okay, the distinct nature from epsilon to lambda is the idea that you'll have knowledge of the planes of different starting points to choose from. It's like having an overview of the whole maze without even having to run each simulation to know the path to your objective. And so, while epsilon has the ability to navigate different decision trees, lambda has the full plane of all decision trees already mapped. But the question becomes, how do we achieve that in our simulation today? Well, you guessed it. To build these planes, we have to conduct parallel simulation runs. So first, we introduce an infinite array of characters for the lab assistants, each with their own skills, levels of expertise, and other values as our toggles here. Then, we run multiple simulations in parallel, each starting with a different lab assistant. Don't worry, let's assume that we have enormous computing capability for this quantum simulation. We would then observe how each choice influences the decision tree, the research outcome, and the overall trajectory of our test subject. Perhaps in some simulations, we'd find that a specific assistant could handle complex tasks autonomously, which would then free our subject so she could focus on other strategic areas. As we run through these parallel simulations, we also have to consider variations in objectives for each run. Things like the longest career span, the most dramatic research breakthrough, or perhaps the fastest completion of the main goal. We can analyze how different arrays of initial conditions influence the likelihood of achieving these objectives. By the end of this, we'll have developed a comprehensive understanding, an enormous database full of decision trees, and how each one of them can be strategically leveraged to achieve specific goals for our subject. But let's ponder a deeper question at this point. Sure, we've navigated through a labyrinth of decisions and parallel narratives. We can also identify the most advantageous routes for our subject to reach her goals. But what next? What if there's more to this vast database? What if we could decipher the very fabric of her reality, the fundamental parameters that construct her world? So welcome to this Sigma level. Okay, so our objective here is to uncover the secret engine of Dr. Allen's universe, meaning the intricate lines of code and algorithms at the core of the simulation. The way we do that is to focus on predictive analysis. It's kind of like a detective piecing together a complex puzzle. And so let's revisit this database again. This enormous array that we collected from the lambda level will be analyzed for a lot of different variables. Things like consistent outcomes, recurring numerical values, and specific sequences of events. We can use Grover's algorithm to quickly locate specific decision paths that are of interest for our hypothesized engine modeling. Some of this hypothesis could include probabilistic decisions. We need to analyze how choices lead to different probabilities of an event. Like in this case, we make a guess that the success rate is a 70% chance by collaborating with scientist number 182. Number 2, trigger events. There should be specific conditions that trigger certain events in our subject's world. Like discovering that publishing in a top-tier journal triggers invitations to elite conferences. Character interaction. We analyze how interactions between other characters affect outcomes. After all these, and perhaps gigantic numbers of other variables, we formulate hypothesis of the predicted model in each of those lines, corresponding to the complete dynamics of her simulated world. We can refer this process as engine rule extraction. When we run simulations based on this hypothesis, we need to observe if the outcome can be accurately predicted using our rule. For instance, simulate the scenario where our subject collaborates with different scientists. We can then observe if the success rate aligns with the hypothesized 70%. If not, adjust our rule based on this new info, and then rerun. Once we decipher these secret laws of physics, the sigma level allows for an unprecedented manipulation in our subject's reality. So to demonstrate this, we start by replicating the complex lines of code that form the foundation of Dr. Allen's world. But rather than making changes directly to this primary world, we take a subtler approach. We create a mirrored version of her reality, a kind of parallel space that exists within the original simulation. This is a special domain where our subject can safely experiment with the fabric of this newly formed reality. Within the secondary world, she has the power to alter the constants and rules that govern this inner universe. This methodical approach allows her to see how each modification in the mechanics of her simulation can shift the trajectory in this microcosmic realm. Now, you can create a line of code that literally smooths your trajectory to your goal, even when you've chosen the least competent lab assistant. By altering the fundamental rules and parameters of the simulation, we can create scenarios that deviate drastically from standard gameplay expectations. In the end, this whole approach is to demystify the complex laws of physics that govern the world of our subject. And that's the world of sigma. We finally arrived at the final frontier, omega. This realm is where we map out all conceivable arrays of the laws of physics within her subsimulation, essentially creating a universe of boundless possibilities. Let's search for something peculiar in this database that we've already mapped out here. Here it is. Back at the sigma level, we altered this parameter so that when the grant proposal number reaches 74, instead of ordinary events, she receives 13 balloons. I mean, that's quite unusual within the standard framework, isn't it? What about discovering another unusual phenomenon within this array? We've previously transformed it from attending a conference to gaining mind-reading abilities or teleporting to another world. And so in Omega, we can not only experience but also map out all these diverse pathways, becoming the architects of each reality. This level goes beyond merely playing the game. It's about mapping every conceivable scenario and rewriting it. We possess the ability to reshape Dr. Allen's world in ways that challenge the very concept of her reality. As we delve into this ultimate level of simulation, an intriguing thought emerges from the depths of our creation. That every rule we've altered, every scenarios that we've crafted, it's always been us at the controls. We've been the puppeteers of Dr. Allen's world and the intricate layer of her subsimulation. What if we step back and look upward? Could it be that our own reality, the world we perceive as tangible and absolute, is itself a construct of a higher order? The simulation hypothesis by Nick Bostrom becomes really pertinent. Bostrom suggests that if future civilizations reach a point where they can create numerous simulations of their ancestors, it becomes challenging to be sure we're not in one of those simulations right now.
That there is some advanced civilization who built a lot of computers, and that what we experience is an effect of what's going on inside one of those computers, so that the world around us, our own brains, everything we see and perceive and think and feel would exist because this computer running certain programs.
In a simulation, experiences feel just as real as in the actual physical world. So, based on the principle of indifference, the chance of us being in a simulation is equal to the number of simulated beings that exist. And so, if we, with our current quantum technology, can construct worlds so complex and believable for Dr. Allen, isn't it plausible that our own reality might be a sophisticated simulation operated by a more advanced being? Perhaps, in the grand scheme of this vast universe, we are not the puppeteers we perceive ourselves to be. We might just be intricately woven puppets in a grander simulation, unknowingly dancing to the tunes of a higher reality. How does this understanding influence the perspective of your own life? Remember to keep exploring, because every moment and every experience in our lives adds a new meaning to our existence.